I'm already recording, so there we go. We're already recording, Nick. Hello.
Hello, Anastasia. It's been an interesting start to the day by the look of it. Clutching your coffee there for dear life.
I mean, for dear life. I spent a week working overnight, so that means my call times for work were usually around 7 p.m., and I didn't wrap up work until about 4 a.m., so my whole clock was turned around, and I needed an entire day yesterday to recover. But I think I'm better now.
Excellent.
How was your week?
Week was fine. I don't think I've watched enough tennis, but there you go.
Story of our lives.
Yeah,
we didn't watch enough tennis.
The Madrid night sessions have gone a little long, I think, but maybe I'm probably a bit of a lightweight now, but I'm getting older, so that makes sense.
You need your full 8 hours of sleep, and tennis sometimes does not agree or let that happen. Definitely. That's why I usually love tennis. Huh?
Definitely not in the US.
No, it doesn't. And that's why I usually love tennis when it's in Europe, because the tennis happens in the morning for me. So it's like I start my day getting ready, watching tennis, and it's done. If it goes long, it's usually done around 2 or 3 p.m. But if not, days could end around 1, which is perfect for me. So welcome back, everyone. You might have listened to the mini pod, which we talked about the Madrid Open, the first week of the Madrid Open, more or less. And we're going to round up the Madrid Open, the results, the tournament itself, and just talk about, I feel like this is a tournament that's had more news than tennis, or at least an equal helping of news and tennis that kind of affects the rest of, maybe not the rest of the full season, but, the next few events for sure. But in general, Nick, how has the Madrid Open, just to note, we're recording this at about 9:30 a.m. Eastern, and the men's final has not been played yet, so we don't know the results of that, but, stay tuned to our social medias. We'll talk about that. But somehow, I think whoever wins the Madrid men's final is a win-win situation. But either way, Nick, how has the tournament in general been for you? Not either side.
Anastasia, can you remind me, what was the last match you talked about on the mini pod in terms of the women's side?
Ooh, in terms of the women's side, I think the last, Danielle Collins, her last win.
That.
Yeah.
She'd gone out.
Yeah. That was the last match I talked about.
Okay, so the Sabalenka match. Or was it the win?
No. Her last win. Okay. Who did she win against before Sabalenka? It was now I'm spacing.
Delivic. No, Delivic wasn't one.
No, that was like first round.
That was her first round match, yeah.
Let me look it up.
I'm looking it up as well. Because that kind of impacts sort of what we talk about here. Because, okay, I've got it.
And I think we could definitely talk about like even matches I talked about last week, because I didn't hit every single match.
No, I'm just trying to make sure we're kind of we don't need to talk about every single match here. But anyway, so I'm going to just come in on this. So on the women's side, obviously the early kind of name that everyone was watching was Danielle Collins to see how she was doing, and you talked about her a lot on the mini pod. And she had a really, really good opening round battle against Olga Danilovic, and then second round against Jacqueline Christian, coming from a set down in both. And then she ended up having a tussle with Arina Sabalenka, and that ended up being must-watch tennis, where Sabalenka kind of clawed her way back in, because it felt like for about a set and a half, Collins was playing the better tennis, and Sabalenka kind of stabilized throughout the match and then slowly worked it in her favor, to the point where eventually by the third set she was well on top in that. But it was a really good contest between those two, and that was a big result for Sabalenka because she has not been in great form since winning the Australian Open. But this was the first tournament we'd seen where she's kind of back to her old self. We then saw that against in the quarterfinals against Mira Andreeva, where she comfortably beat Mira, although Mira did compete a little bit in the second set. And I guess that ended up being a lot of the story of the tournament was then everyone's eyes turned to, oh, Sabalenka might be not back, but someone who seems to have got their mojo again, and that she became the one to watch through the tournament as the matches just got better and better. With her, we had Elena Rybakina having a scare in the quarterfinals. Iga Swiatek dropped a set to Haddad Maia. So we ended up with a very, very solid Madrid semi-final lineup involving 3 of the top 4 players in the world, plus Madison Keys, who knocked out Coco Gauff and Ons Jabeur. Had a very good couple of weeks, Maddie Keys. And then essentially, what happened with the women's tournament was we had an amazing semi-final between Rybakina and Sabalenka that went to a final set tiebreak that could have gone either way. That match could have gone either way. And we thought, well, that's going to be difficult to top. And then the final happened, where Swiatek saved championship points to beat Aryna Sabalenka in an insane contest that I don't think, it's less than 24 hours. I haven't recovered from it, and a lot of tennis fans haven't recovered for it. I'm still processing the tennis that I witnessed during that match. It was a fantastic contest between Sabalenka, who has all that power, against Swiatek, who has big game. Don't get me wrong, but it's not as big as Aryna's, and her having to kind of find her way to give herself enough footing to find a way of getting some kind of offense on and not solely rely on defense, and her realizing she couldn't necessarily go toe to toe with Aryna on firepower, so she had to figure something out. And the match went all kinds of different directions. Iga could have won it in straights. Aryna could have won it in straights. The third set could have gone either way. Both players saving match points. It was an absolute epic that tennis. It's the kind of matches you watch tennis for. And yeah, that was. I think everyone's talking about that as the match of the year. Definitely hard. Which is, I don't think I can argue with that. I'd even argue it was probably better than most of the men's matches this year, if not all of them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
in terms of more,
I'd have to look back through but I don't even think there's been a men's match yet for me this year that I'm sort of oh, that's the one. I still think of maybe men's matches from last year, that the level of that Cincinnati 2023 final against Novak and Alcaraz, that's going to take some beating for sure. But that's the tennis. That's the tennis that happened in Madrid. I was looking more for sort of what the tournament was like in general as a viewing fan, especially as a fan who didn't attend the tournament and it's at home. I always say we have a website now. If you haven't been to the website, give it a visit, and you can it's still a work in progress. We're very busy people. So slowly it's going to get some writing on it, and you can listen to the podcast on the website if you want. But it's groundpasspodcast.com. I'll put all the links and everything in our show notes. But the reason why I bring that up is we have a little about page that it's not fleshed out yet. It's going to be better. But I put on there my favorite tournament is the Madrid Open. I love Madrid as a city. It's a city I actually lived in for a long time. I love this tournament because if you're a fan who's not at the event, I think they just provide so much content for you that you just don't feel like you're missing anything. I mean, I am still trying to catch up on their podcast series, Iguales, where they interview different players. Last year, they had a whole bunch. This year, they interviewed Sebi Corda. They interviewed Francis Tiafoe. I think there's a Sinner interview as well. They interviewed Muguruza, who just retired. So they have that. Then they have their Twitch stream where they just stream. I've actually seen, because I've only seen the Twitch stream, but for the first time this year, I kind of saw the the area where they do it. So the audience who attends the tournament in person, they're kind of like they're separated by a rope and they can watch the Twitch stream there live as we're watching it live. So it's literally the same experience. And they get players who have just either won their match, come on, they get past players, they get guests and things like that. So it kind of provides all this content that if you want to delve into and want to feel like you're there in Madrid, I think it's really great what the tournament is doing. I have not seen a Grand Slam do this. Like, it's so much stuff that they do that it's really great. And I think a lot of tournaments could do well to implement some of the things that the Madrid Open does to help kind of not only draw in an audience that's in the city that they're in, but to draw in a wider audience and, have that feel from the tournament. Have you watched any of
No,
the stuff they've put out?
no, haven't engaged with it.
Okay.
Again, there's so much content out there. It's difficult for me to do that on the schedule I've got. I'd say from observation, I mean, of actually attending the tournament, there's been a lot of sort of talk about the centre court, the Menolo Santana, being known as like the magic box. I forget what the Spanish is. Capo Magic.
Caja Mágica.
Caja Mágica. Yeah, that's it. I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Would have come in handy a couple of times in my life, but I don't. So I've heard about sort of like what the atmosphere can be. I think that's something that you can only experience being there. And I think it only really comes across when it's a Spanish player involved. That's when it really...
Yeah.
We saw that with Rafael Nadal's matches this tournament. We've seen that with whenever Carlos Alcaraz plays there. So, that kind of combination. In terms of like the layout, I think Madrid has one of the most controversial tennis shadows, shall we call it, in terms of like what...
Oh my goodness, Shadowgate.
Yeah, where like if you watch, like there's the way the shadow kind of falls across the court, it's actually very hard to watch because like half the court's and like it's bathed in sunlight and the other half is completely dark. There's a couple of other tournaments around,
and I think
that do that. Halle as well. But for me also, the court itself and the way it's designed, it does feel kind of like a soulless metal box. And I think for me, it's the fans that make the tournament special, not necessarily anything the tournament itself is doing, no matter how great it is at keeping people who aren't attending engaged.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's so funny. The whole design of the stadium, even down to the trophy, it's such a sort of modern, almost cold design. And it's weird for a tennis tournament to have that sort of, it's so severe. They call it the magic box. It's a literal box. And the shadow, it's a line. It's so severe, all these things with the design of the stadium. I have to say, again, I love everything else about the Madrid Open. The design of the main stadium, I do not like at all. Or any stadium in general where they have the lower level is almost these sort of like boxes. They're sort of, it's hard to explain. I'm going to put in our show notes a picture of what it looks like, but they're these sort of like individual sort of VIP type boxes. And then on top of it is where you get more of the stadium seating. But what that means is that even when the stadium is literally sold out, which by the way, Madrid was sold out, I think they said by 90% before the tournament even began. So even though it's sold out, it doesn't look it on TV because just the way the box is photographed, you're just like, why is it just so empty? And you're like, oh no, those are actually people. But just the way it was built, I don't like. So yeah, it's definitely not my favorite stadium, but for the sort of content and information, because I think also what I love about tennis tournaments that do this is like, it's nice to learn more about the players themselves, so having all this interviews and information given to you. It's sort of like you get a different sense of who these players are and what they like, and then you see their tennis, and you kind of can marry those two images together, and form a more complete view of who a tennis player is. I think so many players benefit from that, like a Medvedev, for example, who I think his reputation on court um, is so different from what he's like in person. And when you listen to his interviews, you're like, oh, I get it. It's a different person on court. I was listening to, I think, maybe it was someone talking on the Served podcast about that specific topic where, you know, when players step on court, it's to do battle, it's not always. So they're not there to sort of show their fun and happy personality. They're trying to win a match. So you might get a different idea of who they are. So you talked a little bit about the WTA tournament, which was excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, Madrid this year produced some phenomenal tennis on the WTA side. Can you point to one match in particular? I mean, and it's so hard. You know what? One match other than the final, because the final might be the match of the year.
Yeah.
We might look back in December and say that was it. So let's take that out of the picture. But other than that, was there any match or maybe even a moment on the WTA side that you were like, yes, that's tennis?
Well, the Sabalenka Rybakina final, semi-final, was pretty close, I think. So seeing those two going toe to toe in the way that they could do, especially again, Arena kind of clawing that one back and clawing in the margin. There was some drama with Rybakina missing some opportunities to take complete control of the match. But yeah, those two kind of going kind of even Stevens for like 3 sets was really, really special. I think that was pretty good. I mean, like actually day one, Colin Stanilovic, that got some a lot of hype. I think I caught the end of it. I can't remember which Collins matches I watched, but I think I caught some of it. I think I watched the second set and then went to bed. That was already kind of causing a stir and sort of, okay, something's kind of going on here.
Yeah.
Certainly the lineup throughout the tournament was really, really good because, as I said, like you had Madison Keys having a great run. You had Ons Jabeur managing to fight her way into the quarterfinals, which was great for her. I think there was just these sort of like, okay, the top players are all kind of showing up. And then there's some of the up and coming players also showing up, like Mira Andreeva. But kind of on that point, and kind of tying back into what you were talking about with the content, I think one of the talking points from Madrid kind of off court and in terms of the content was there are people out there who are claiming that the WTA players weren't getting as much attention from the Madrid content as the ATP. Thinking about the final, like there wasn't a lot of updates during it on social media. I don't know whether as someone who's kind of been consuming that content, that's something that you've noticed.
No, not particularly. I was no, maybe even because the first podcast that Igualas did was actually a really fun one with Donna Vekic.
Yeah.
She did the first Igualas
I think I heard
podcast interview. That was
because it was Pat.
Yeah, that was like a really fun one. It's not something that I paid attention. I'm not out here doing tallies, maybe like one for one. I tend not to do that. I think I've seen pretty equal like showing, but I can't be sure because I'm not out here doing one for one tallies and stuff.
I don't think tallies is necessarily what you need really. Like if it ends
up
by 40, fine.
Right.
It's when it's like 70-30 that it's a problem. And like I'm asking because I've not observed it because I've not been consuming the content, and I do wonder whether a lot of it is kind of an overhang from some of the stuff that happened in like the last couple of years with it. That sort of
right. And just for context for our listeners who might not know, I think Madrid has definitely had its share of controversy where it comes to this. It's the same tournament that had the sort of model girl ball girls, but they only had it on center court, which was always a weird thing, and not all of the others. And then they also last year There was Cakegate, which still to today is to me the most overblown thing I've ever witnessed in
I
social
agree with
media ever.
I agree with that, by the way, because the whole thing
Um,
with like Carlos Alcaraz getting this giant cake presented to him on court compared to Rita Sabalenka getting presented with something smaller off court. First of all,
yeah,
that was still a decent sized cake. I'd have been happy with that. But secondly, it wasn't. I think it was Alcaraz's nationality had more to do with that than whether he was an ATP or a WTA player.
exactly. I think, if Paula Badosa's birthday had fallen, at the same time and she was on court, they would have done the whole big thing too. But either way, that kind of led to the tournament, I think, putting their foot in it when, because of the cake gate, it brought up some other issues that some players were talking about, one of them being Vika Azarenka, and she was half of the doubles
Yeah,
team, or like she was the finalist.
yeah, fine.
So they didn't win. Right. And after the trophy, like they gave them the trophy, and usually the players have a speech afterwards. And the Madrid Open did not let them speak. They said they were, strapped for time, and they had to get the court ready for the next match, which was the men's final. And that was very odd. And I think they definitely put their foot in it with that one, because it's one thing to not want to be criticized, but you can't really, that's just not the way to handle a situation like that. People should be allowed to speak their mind, whichever way it is. And then you can just learn from it. If they have issues with the tournament, whatever they say, we can learn from it, and the tournament just gets better. So that's why. So, if anything, I think maybe you're right. There is some sort of a spillover from that. I do think I saw some comments from Ons Jabeur, which were more general, saying that, in her hotel room, for example, they weren't really playing women's matches. Like all the sports channels were mostly focused on the men's matches, and which is just something I think in general women's tennis has to deal with. And sports channels in general, there should be equal coverage of both tours. It's what we're trying to do here. And yeah, so in terms of that, I think it might be a spillover. It might be new things, but I haven't really seen anything new per se that I could
Nothing on
say,
that
that I could point out.
anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I personally think the WTA tournament this year was so exciting, and tennis wise just so rewarding. And I felt like, okay, great, we got a tournament, because we can now flip over to the ATP side, where it started pretty shaky and then just kind of fell apart.
Yeah, that is
Like we got
the draw fell apart, which is something you don't necessarily expect from an ATP event. And it would kind of fell apart due to non-tennis related reasons. Well, kind of
non
indirect tennis related reasons. If you say that people getting injured by playing tennis,
right, exactly. So coming into the Madrid Open, Carlos Alcaraz, who is sort of the star of this tournament at this point, because one, he is Spanish, two, he's won it twice, 2 years in a row. So he's coming in as a defending champion. We didn't even know if he was going to play. He had withdrawn from Monte Carlo and from the Barcelona Open because he had an arm injury, and there was a big question mark on whether he would play or not. So already at the start of the tournament, I think it was shaky. Everyone was talking about with the tournament would lose its main star and all that. But we did have Nadal, which I think was in the first week the saving grace on the men's side, because we had a huge sort of storyline of Nadal and him playing well and getting a little bit of a thank you goodbye from the tournament at the end of it. But Carlos did end up playing. He actually played way better than I expected, because looking at his draw, he really had some tough opponents coming up. And I think the one that I thought would stop him in his tracks, which was Jan-Lennard Struff, who we had talked about the last episode. He just came off of winning a title in Munich. He was the finalist last year against Carlos Alcaraz. So I thought, ooh, this might be a challenge for him. And he beat him. And I thought, oh, wow, like he's playing not his best. I think he was definitely in the sort of 70-80% range. And I thought, wow, if he can get through Struff, maybe he does have a chance. And I think that's when I jinxed it. I personally jinxed the tournament because I said, oh, he got through Struff. We might have another Carlos Alcaraz title run here. And Andre Rublev said, no, ma'am. No, I'm back, baby.
Yeah, because Rublev's been a real dry spot for a while. Like he's been struggling to win matches for since Dubai in February.
Yeah, it's been a very, very, very tough run for Rublev. You could almost see it, which was I think the sad part on his face and his attitude on court. But he hadn't won back-to-back matches since Dubai. He hadn't won a match, I think, since Dubai, and that's a lot of weeks to not be winning. And so coming into Madrid, his first round match, I think I can't remember who his first round match was, but it was something where, huh?
I remember it being a tough fight, right?
It was. I think it actually was. Let me pull up Andre Rublev's first.
Yeah, he played.
Yeah, so he played. So his first round match was against Facundo Bagas, and that was a match that he was supposed to win, and he did. He won it 1-4, and it was kind of finally he won a match. And sometimes with tennis players, you just need that boost. That's sort of like, I still got it. I can still play tennis. And it was a big enough boost to take him through the rest of the tournament. I mean, his next match against ADF, Davodich Fokina, the Spaniard, was a tough run. I remember that one was fun. Did ADF fall? Yes, he did. That is a meme that, if you don't know about, I'm going to put the meme channel in the show notes because ADF tends to fall literally every match. He has a problem with gravity. But he just kept rolling through the draw. And so he was the next opponent against Carlos Alcaraz after the Struff match. And I thought, okay, this is now the test because Rublev was looking great. Carlos was surviving with one arm, basically, and just playing backhands, it seemed like. And this was going to be the test. And, Carlos took that first set, and I was like, wow, Carlos really might win the Madrid Open. And then he promptly lost the next two sets. But I have to say, I think I posted about this, but that match was just a lesson in serving, in spot serving, because Rublev isn't that tall. I think he's like 6'2", maybe 6'3". And he was just serving, and they weren't even fast. It wasn't he was serving fast. He was just hitting the lines like with this much margin. So it was like really, really such a great performance at the net. I actually think there is a clip of this at the net. Carlos was like, that was really good serving. So yeah, I think Rublev has almost had a resurgent run, finding his form again. He beat Taylor Fritz, Clayler Fritz, as we should refer to him now, in the semifinals. And he's a finalist in Madrid. His match hasn't started yet. It will start in a few hours here. But I think this then brings us to his opponent, Felix Auger-Aliassime. FAA is a finalist in Madrid, which on its own, I would say, great. I mean, this is a moment he's needed for so long. He's been on the comeback from injury, I feel like, for 2 years now. Like, it's been so...
Was he injured or was he just out of form?
He was injured. I mean, first he was injured. So he had that great indoor run, which was, what was that, 2020?
22.
2021?
22, I think. Because he defended a title in Basel last year and everyone was like, oh.
In Basel, yeah. So it was 22. So the run was 22. Right after that run, he got injured, and then just was kind of on a recovery, trying to come back all of 2023. Like for the most part in 2023, he was just on the recovery train and trying to come back. And when we got back to the indoor season, he did really well in Basel. He got to the final in Basel. But other than that, that was the only thing kind of big run he had last year. He definitely fell down the rankings a lot. And for someone who I think when FAA first came on the scene, people used to talk about him like they talk about Alcaraz now, which is crazy to think
Yeah.
based on his current form. But that's how they talked about FAA. He was being coached by Nadal's uncle. Like it was such a,
I think
he's the
that
next
only
big
started in
thing.
2021, whereas he's been a thing since 2019. We got to the
Yeah,
final.
yeah.
So like that was before Tony Nadal turned up.
Oh yeah, but again, it's just like that's the level that people believed in him to be able to sort of attract a coach like that. It was a moment where people were like, he's the next big thing. So it was kind of not disappointing, because I think a lot of times when we're disappointed with athletes is, I think, almost too much. But he just didn't live up to the dreams that people had for him, I would say, and probably the ones he had for himself. I think he probably thought he would be way ahead of the game by now. So, he hasn't had a run since Basel. He's been slowly coming back, putting matches together. He started winning back. I mean, it was so bad that he just wasn't winning back-to-back matches, and now he started winning back-to-back matches. And then comes Madrid, where he puts together a win. I think he gets through his first and second round, but not really. It's always his run. Let me just explain his run so far to the finals of Madrid. So he beat Manarino in his first round. He gets a walkover from Jakub Mensik in his second round. He has a phenomenal match. This is one of the matches at the ATP side for this tournament that was great, against Casper Ruud in his third round, beating a very informed Casper Ruud. He then gets a walkover in his qualifying from Jannik Sinner and gets another walkover in his semifinals against Jiří Lehečka. And now he's a finalist. So he has played two complete matches, and 3 walkovers to get to this point, which I don't know if that's ever happened. Do you remember any such thing happening?
It's not. I think it has been heard of before.
Not on the ATP side.
Yeah, there's obviously been a couple of like times like Muguruza did it. I think there was US Djokovic getting to the US Open final in 2016. He benefited from a few walkovers in that.
Okay.
In that run, because I think he had Hiri Vesely in the first round, and that was a retirement. I think I can't remember exactly who he had to play, but he did at least have one other person pull out on him. So I think that's a run this could be compared to as well. I mean, it's tough for Felix because this is the biggest final of his career, and this is a huge opportunity for him to win a Masters 1000. Like, I don't think he's going to get a better one than this. But obviously there's going to be that whole, he kind of benefited from Sinner being injured, Lehečka being injured, and to a certain extent that's true. But then if you look at how he played against Casper Ruud, then it's a whole different thing. And he definitely earned himself a place in at least the quarterfinals.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of, you win the matches that are in front of you. It's not his fault, and he's still a top-class player. It's not like it's some 19-year-old kid no one's ever heard of.
Right. And we'll come to that in a second. But yeah, so it's been a really weird run. But, I feel like other players have benefited from things like this. Maybe not as many walkovers, but there's definitely been other players benefiting from a walkover that got them through a tournament or anything like that. So, like you said, you play the matches in front of you. It's not his fault. People were injured and had to withdraw. But that kind of brings us to the amount of injuries that were in Madrid at the Madrid Open. And they're not from the Madrid Open. It's not like a lot of, no, actually, I feel like most of them
their stuff
didn't actually
carrying. Like Sinner's injury has been flaring up since Monte Carlo. Alcaraz we've known about since before Monte Carlo. Lehečka might
Jakub Mensik
Mensik, yeah.
Yeah, Mentek, he had the same. I mean, I was worried. I've been worried about his arm since Indian Wells because I watched him play in Indian Wells and he had the whole strapping around his arm. I'm like, that's some intense strapping, but he's just kept playing. So something was bound to hit, I guess, at some point. And Yuri Lehechka, this is his first tournament. This was his first tournament on clay since hard court because he had a lower back issue. So he had pulled out of all the tournaments before Madrid because of that lower back, and he managed to get through, all the way up to the semifinals before his back, I guess, locked up on him again. So yeah, these are all injuries
And
that these players have been. Huh?
Medvedev as well. I don't know about his.
Oh yes, we didn't mention Medvedev because he just wasn't in any of these runs, but he also had to withdraw because of, I think he his was an abductor, like inner thigh issue. But yeah, that's a lot of withdrawals that now everyone's looking towards. And so what has come out of that is Carlos Alcaraz has pulled out of Rome, which is the next tournament. We'll talk about that. And so has Yannick Sinner, the Italian stallion. Yannick Sinner has pulled out of his home Masters. There's a question mark on defending champion Medvedev. He hasn't announced yet whether or not he's going to be in that tournament. And now you're looking towards the French Open thinking, wait, who's in form on the ATP side? Is Nadal just going to walk into the French Open and be like, got it?
I mean,
15, retire, call it a day.
I mean, like, all fans would absolutely love that, I think. And yeah, I mean,
oh, of course.
There's a certain extent where, I think other players will probably, I think it's now struggling to see who's in form for that. But we're not necessarily a previews podcast or predictions podcast, so we don't need to necessarily look that far ahead. But actually, on Nadal now, I mean, like, as someone who actually really, you're someone who's a Nadal fan. Are you frustrated for Nadal that Lehechka's back issue flared up later in the tournament than it did? Because otherwise, you could be talking about Nadal in the semi-finals against FAA, and then who knows what would have happened?
Who knows what would have happened? But actually, no. Because, and I think Andy Roddick, I listen to the Serve podcast a lot. I'll put the link in the show notes. It's a really fun podcast, mainly because it's coming from a former player. So he has very different insights about things. And he mentioned this about Nadal's run. And he said it was almost the perfect amount of matches. He gets a couple of rounds. He gets, he gets an easy win in his first round against the youngster Darwin Blanche. He plays Kachin, that was fine, and he gets challenged by Yuri Lehechka and doesn't get through. He was like 4 matches, seems perfect, especially when Nadal still has a body that's coming back. He's still coming back from injury. He's gonna play Rome, then he's gonna play the French Open, or he wants to anyway. He also wants to play the Olympics. It's a big schedule for someone who is halfway out of the tour and almost going to retire. So I put on my social media that every match is all, there's no expectations. Every match he wins makes me happy. Every round he wins makes me happy. If he's out in the first round of the French Open, at least he tried, because I do think his body is yelling at him at this point. I think before it was like a little whisper, like, oh, maybe we should stop playing. And I think now it's screaming. It's like, let's stop. Let's call it a day. It's been great. It's been great, Nadal. And I just want him to, because he seems to be the sort of player who wants to finish on court, who wants to just have a competitive run and finish on court versus just sort of a handshake and kissing babies kind of thing. So it's nice to see. It was also announced during this time that he was going to play the Laver Cup, which I don't know who else, like, if I could just fly to Berlin, I would buy tickets now. Because that's going to be great.
Expensive.
Yeah. Yep. It is.
Like, wow.
And you just know based on Rogers last year, I mean, if it's even close to what happened with Roger last year, it's going to be an emotional ride. It's going to be an emotional ride. I think it's actually.
Roger's likely going to be there because I think the suggestion is that Labour
Oh
will
yeah,
the farewell.
yeah. Do you think he's going to play Roger just to say goodbye to Rafa? I would not be surprised if he
Hmm.
did.
I don't know. I think it because he's been having. I remember him giving an interview saying that, like, post retirement, he's been talking about treatments for the leg, and he wasn't getting some
Mm,
good news with it. So I'm not sure. I think he'd have to go and undergo training just to do that match. I don't.
yeah,
I don't see it happening, not unless Roger is incredibly stubborn about it. And I don't know. I think Roger will be there. I could imagine Roger maybe being kind of drafted in as like an honorary member of the team, but I don't think he'll take.
yeah. Ugh, that will be just the best. Anyway, that's Madrid. Men's finals to come. The women's tournament was
I don't think we actually said
just
who actually
phenomenal.
won the
Again,
tournament. Actually, we just said the final was amazing, but I don't think the.
no, you did.
No,
You gave it away in the first like few
no,
minutes.
but
You're
like
like, and then Eagle won.
I can't remember if I said Eagle won. I thought I just said the final was a good match.
Oh, I don't. Well, now I don't even remember. So you can talk about that.
No, I was literally just going to say Iga Swiatek won the women's tournament. That's it. Like, just to clarify, in case I didn't say it before, and you were wondering, Nick, yeah, the final sounded great. Who won? But like,
Who did
it
it?
was one of those times where, like, I think I focused on the final because it didn't really matter who won. It was that good a match, and that's what
Yeah.
can make tennis special sometimes. But yeah, we're on to Rome. Again, sort of WTA side is going to be more about preparing for Roland Garros, especially since the clay courts of Rome are much more similar to Roland Garros compared to any other tournament that have played so far, whereas the ATP Madrid is kind of the outlier in terms of kind of how the ball behaves when it's being played. But the ATP tour is going to be without Carlos and without Sinner, so then you're potentially Medvedev as well. Suddenly you're looking at, is Novak Djokovic lining up another Rome title at the minute? Or is Casper Ruud going to get himself together to stop him? Is Andrei Rublev going to go on a run? What's Tsitsipas going to do? Yeah, for me, that's going to, if you're looking at the kind of the stories of the tour, it's kind of very difficult. Whereas it's kind of, okay, let's see who's really going to be contenders at Roland Garros for the women's. At the ATP side, it's going to be, so we know how it's not looking great for Sinner and Alcaraz. How is it looking for Novak? That's going to be the main
Yeah.
question.
That's like a big question mark. He hasn't played
Monte
since the
Carlo.
Australian Open.
No, Monte Carlo. He played Monte Carlo.
Monte
It's
Carlo.
the same.
Oh yes, he did play Monte Carlo. Of course.
Lots of
Of
route.
course he played. We had the whole moment. Yeah, with the yelling at the crowd. Um, but yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what he looks like. It's been funny to me, and you can bookmark this episode. But if Novak retires this year, I won't be surprised. More than anything this year, because he already doesn't play a lot of tournaments. He just doesn't. Yeah, he focuses on the Grand Slams, and he kind of then does, play a few tournaments before each one. Um, but there's been something about Novak. I think we talked about it a little bit, maybe when we talked about our Monte Carlo episode. But he separated from his coach, longtime coach. It was announced last week that he also has separated now from his longtime physio. So two very key members of the team are gone. He's also been kind of, I say he's on some sort of like, it feels like a retirement tour. That's what it feels like to me. He's been at all these tournaments. Like, he showed up in Miami. He didn't play Miami, but he showed up in Miami, was kind of like at parties and events and things like that. He didn't play in Madrid, but he showed up in Madrid. He was given the Laureus Award for Sportsman of the Year. So he's kind of just been on this sort of, enjoying the kind of spoils of being an elite athlete and being such a huge champion. And he's in the Rome draw. We do suppose he will play the French Open because he is a defending champion of the French Open. He said he wants to play the Olympics and win the Olympic gold finally. So I don't know. I don't know how you have seen it, but the way I've seen it, I'm just like he's 1 foot out the door, which is I wouldn't have said that at the beginning of the year, but that's what it feels like to me.
I don't know. I don't know because Djokovic is an interesting character. I could see a scenario where maybe his body started to finally give up on him, given the age he's at. He's only a year younger than Nadal, but equally he's kept himself in such good shape that he's someone that I could have seen playing into their 40s, and he does love tennis that much. The coaching stuff, I agree, is kind of an interesting direction. Is that maybe he's starting to wind stuff down a bit, but I think he is going to be really dialed in for Rome and Roland Garros. Because he's going to want to go. He wants to be like, we talk about. Oh yeah, he's got the same number of Grand Slams as Margaret Court on the women's side. No, he's going to want more than that. He's going to want 25. He is, and he wants that Olympic gold because then he's won. He will have literally completed tennis if he gets Olympic gold. I also think for Djokovic, he spent a lot of his career trying to get out of the shadow of Federer and Nadal and kind of say, no, like, I'm here, I deserve to be talked about as much as these guys, and like his results have earned it. But Federer and Nadal have got that kind of love, kind of got that sort of legend around them more from non-tennis fans than he does. I think it's the non-tennis fans that are kind of forget about him a little bit sometimes. I think with this year being about Nadal's swan song, I think Djokovic will do at least one more year after this because he's going to want to be the center of attention. I don't see him being the type to quietly retire. And if like Andy's going as well at some point this year. So for me, Djokovic will probably want to have some more attention of it being like a farewell tour and like everyone know about it, like with Nadal. So if he does retire, I don't see it being this year. I see it being more next year at the earliest, maybe even the year after.
Yeah. It's, it'll be interesting because Nadal hasn't really said when or how he's doing his little retirement thing. If it does happen at the Laver Cup, it'll be interesting to see if that's just now a thing. All these players just retire at Laver Cup. Although I just do think that it's just a symptom of the relationship between Federer and Nadal, and how intertwined their careers were, that they have very similar kind of ceremony retiring things. I mean, I'm sure they're going to have a parade in Spain somewhere for Nadal. So, but yeah, so hey, that's Rome. It's going to be very interesting to see how the ATP tour resolves itself. A lot of the big players right now, it's like 3 of the top 4 are question marks going into the French Open, which I don't think we've seen in a long time. And it'll be interesting to see how the health, because I watched a video recently, like last night, I think I saw it, or maybe it was early this morning. What is time? And it was of Holger Rune practicing, and he had a sleeve on his arm, and I was just like, come on. Like, what's happening? What's going on? So maybe this is a bigger conversation for another day. But let's wrap it up with our players of the fortnight. Nick.
Okay, before we go there, like in terms of like quickly noticing on Rome, obviously, if you do want to go, Rome is actually a tournament that a lot of people I know are super excited about, would want to go specifically for, particularly in the UK. So Rome does have a ground pass option. They've got a few more courts available. That facility's very well established. The Italian Open's been around for about 100 years, a bit longer, or about 100 years. And there's some really cool courts actually. If you get an opportunity to sit at and have a look, like one of them looks like a gladiatorial arena, like dug into the ground. But the grounds pass there is fairly affordable. Sort of in the first week, it does kind of go kind of up in price as the tournament goes on. You go from about 18 euros at the start to about 50 euros by the sort of midway through point. And then the main stadium, I think, there's some stuff in there that's quite expensive, but if you want to check that out, then all the details are on the Italian Open website. But it's just something to share because I know people are interested in going to it, if nothing else. So you could go to Rome, the city, which is a very popular destination. But for Player of the Fortnight, tangent over, my Player of the Fortnight is Aryna Sabalenka. And you're probably thinking, but Nick, she lost the final in Madrid. First of all, yes, she did, but she came very close to winning it. And actually, her run has been the story of the tournament. She stopped the Danielle Collins run. She stopped the Rybakina run because Rybakina hadn't lost on clay in a year, even though she didn't win the French Open because she was injured. Rybakina was in a really, really good form, and then obviously had that final with Iga Swiatek. And I think the story that the Sabalenka kind of came into this tournament after sort of seeing Swiatek and Rybakina maybe put people thinking they were pulling away a little bit, and I was considering that possibility, to kind of coming and saying, no, I'm still here. I'm still a contender. Don't ever rule me out. And I think for the last couple of weeks, this has definitely been about Aryna. She couldn't get over the line against Swiatek this year. Swiatek avenged the defeat in Madrid from last year. But yeah, Sabalenka, for me, I think just because she was the talk of the tournament, has to be Player of the Fortnight on the WTA side.
For me, Player of the Fortnight, Jiří Lehečka. For those who don't know, Jiří Lehečka is a young Czech player. I think we've talked about a little bit the phenomenon of young female Czech players. It seems like every other person in Czechia is a tennis player. They just produce such great players, definitely on the women's side. And on the men's side, it's slowly been coming. So we've talked about Thomas Mahak, who's our shorts king. And now we have Jiří Lehečka. I was able to watch him in person for the first time at Indian Wells, and I was just so impressed. He's built not like a tennis player. I think if anyone watches American football, he's built like a quarterback. He's just really big and muscular, and you think, how is he going to get that body to either side of the court? And he does it so beautifully and fluidly, but with power as well. A lot of people talk about Ben Shelton's serve. Some of the serving that Jiří Lehečka did in Madrid was insanity. Like, he was hitting bombs on court. So he has a really big serve, built very differently from a typical tennis player. And he's finally coming, into his basically best serve. He's coached. I don't think he's actually coached by Berdych. I think maybe Berdych is like an advisor in his camp, but a former tennis player himself, has some great runs. Was kind of like a lot of players of that generation, I think, thwarted a little bit by the big three winning everything. But Jiří Lehečka is definitely a player to watch, and it's unfortunate. I think he started the year great. He kind of just, for me anyway, came into view at the United Cup, and I thought, wait, who is this person? I had heard his name, but I'd never seen him play before. So the first time I watched him on TV was at the United Cup. I got to see him in person at Indian Wells, and I was sold. I was an instant fan, for sure, of his style of play. I mean, his match against Andrei Rublev at Indian Wells is one of my favorites so far of this year, because he absolutely crushed Rublev. He was a little ant and he crushed him. And I also love, so I put this on my Twitter, which I'll link below, but I said, Jiří Lehečka looks like the cop, Robert Patrick,
Yes.
the actor, from the Terminator.
Have you seen
Like,
the
if you
story?
just put glasses on him, yes, it's him. And he just has that essence on court of, I will crush you, I will annihilate you, So, and I love that. He's coming there to win every match he plays. And I like that sort of energy. His match against Nadal was great. Again, just great serving. And he beat him in straight sets and wasn't sorry about it. So I hope his back issues resolve themselves. Back issues are really tough for tennis players, but I really hope they resolve itself. He actually was he was the one who got the walkover from Medvedev. Like, he was playing Medvedev in the quarterfinals, and Medvedev had to withdraw after the first set with his injury. So, yeah, Yuri Lehechka, 22-year-old from Czechia, look out for him. He's my player of the fortnight.
Exciting times. I think, look, he's made himself into a Masters 1000 semi-final. It's very likely to be back in similar positions again if he's fit and healthy. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Ground Pass. We're just bringing you up to date with all the tennis. So I'll be doing a mini pod next week to bring you up to speed on what happens in Rome this week. And Anastasia and I will be back in 2 weeks to wrap up as much of the action from Rome as possible, although highly likely we'll both be recording before the men's final again. But we'll see how that goes. So just bear in mind, that's what we're going to be doing, and we'll bring you all the other stories from that tournament. Something to keep an eye on for Rome, by the way, as well. The results from Rome, the rankings after Rome, will not only decide the French Open seeds, but decide who gets direct entry into Wimbledon and doesn't have to qualify. So this is a big week for both tours. I'm looking forward to covering it with Anastasia at some point, and we'll see you then.
Bye.